What if the most sacred act you could perform, the single greatest deed to please your God and guarantee your soul's passage to paradise, was the one thing our modern world universally condemns as the ultimate taboo? What if the path to salvation wasn't paved with prayer, fasting, or charity, but with a union so intimate, so close, that the blood of a husband and wife was already one and the same? Imagine a world where marrying your own sister wasn't just accepted, but celebrated as a weapon against cosmic evil. Imagine a father taking his daughter's hand in marriage not out of perversion, but out of profound, unshakable faith, believing their union would help save the world from a literal demon. This isn't a lurid fantasy. This isn't a barbaric footnote from a forgotten savage tribe. This was the spiritual bedrock of one of the most powerful, sophisticated, and influential civilizations in human history, the Persian Empire. The very empire that gave the world concepts of human rights, the first great monotheistic faith, and architectural marvels that still defy the imagination. For nearly 1,000 years under the Sasanian kings, a practice known as Xwēdōdah, next of kin marriage, was praised by priests and poets as the highest form of piety. It was a holy sacrament, a spiritual technology, and a divine mandate. It was considered a shining beacon of purity in a world drowning in darkness. To them, it was the ultimate act of devotion. To us, it's an unsettling paradox that strikes at the very heart of our understanding of morality, religion, and human nature. How could a society so advanced, so wise, embrace a practice that science now tells us leads to ruin? How could a holy duty be a biological catastrophe? Today we journey back in time into the heart of ancient Persia, to a place where faith and taboo collided. We will not just look at the what, but uncover the why. We will step into the minds of those who lived this reality, who saw in the face of their sibling not just a relative, but a divine partner in a war for the soul of the universe. This is the story of ZhouDynasty, the holy union that became a forbidden memory. To understand an act that seems so incomprehensible we cannot judge it with our modern mind. Not yet. First, we must dismantle our own reality and step into theirs. The world of the ancient Zoroastrian was not a neutral place. It was a battlefield, a violent, ceaseless cosmic war zone, and every single human soul was a soldier on the front lines, whether they knew it or not. This was the very heart of their faith, one of the oldest and most influential religions in history. Long before the God of Abraham, there was Ahura Mazda, the wise Lord. He was the beginning and the end, the creator of all that was good, pure, and orderly. He was light, he was truth, he was life. His existence was one of perfection, harmony, and peace. But he was not alone. In the darkness, another uncreated entity stirred. Angra Mainyu, the destructive spirit. If Ahura Mazda was light, Angra Mainyu was the abyss. If Ahura Mazda was truth, Angra Mainyu was the lie druge. He was chaos, decay, death, and darkness. He was everything that sickened, corrupted, and destroyed. He was the antithesis of creation, and his one driving impulse was to attack, defile, and annihilate the perfect work of Ahura Mazda. The Zoroastrian creation story is not one of a peaceful garden, but of a cosmic assault. The moment Ahura Mazda created the perfect world, Angra Mainyu attacked it, crashing through the sky and plunging into the primordial waters, poisoning everything he touched. He infected the pure fire with smoke, he soured the sweet water, he blighted the perfect earth, he withered the first plant, killed the primordial bull, and slew the first perfect man. He brought disease, vermin, winter, and death into a world that was never meant to know them. But his invasion came at a cost. In attacking the material world, Angra Mainyu and his legion of demons, the Daivas became trapped within it. The universe in its very design became a cosmic prison for the forces of evil, and the ultimate purpose of human existence. The very reason for our creation, was to act as the agents of Ahura Mazda on Earth. Humanity's role was to fight, to purify, to sanctify, and to slowly, generation by generation, corner and destroy the trapped evil of Angra Mainyu until the world could be restored to its original perfect state. At the final judgment, the Frashokareti, every choice mattered. Every action tipped the scales. To speak a truth was to land a blow against the father of lies. To cultivate the earth and make it fertile was to reclaim a piece of the world for Ahura Mazda. To kill a venomous snake or a predatory wolf was to literally destroy a creation of Angra Mainyu. And conversely, to lie, to pollute water, to spread disease, or to despair, this was to surrender ground to the enemy, to aid and abet the cosmic demon. This is the key. The Zoroastrians viewed the world through a lens of spiritual purity versus demonic defilement. And what was the greatest source of purity? The divine spark of Ahura Mazda, which they believed flowed most strongly in the bloodline of the faithful, the followers of the prophet Zoroaster. Their very lineage was a divine inheritance, a sacred substance. And here the terrible divine logic of Xwēdōdah reveals itself. If your bloodline is wholly a conduit of divine energy, then mixing it with the blood of an outsider, a non-believer, was an act of spiritual dilution. It was watering down the very essence that made you a potent warrior for God. It was in a sense a victory for Angra Mainyu, weakening the forces of good. So how do you not only preserve that holy essence but concentrate it? How do you forge a spiritual weapon of unparalleled purity? You create a closed circuit. You turn the family into a spiritual crucible. By joining brother to sister, father to daughter, or mother to son, you weren't just marrying another person. You were fusing two parts of the same sacred substance. The bloodline with its divine inheritance was folded back upon itself, becoming more potent, more pure, more concentrated. In their minds, a child born of such a union was not simply a child. It was a spiritual supernova. A being of such intense purity that the demons of Angra Mainyu would be blinded by its presence. The family unit became a fortress of light, an impenetrable bastion that not only repelled evil, but actively trapped and destroyed it. A Xwēdōdah marriage was considered the most powerful blow a mortal could ever strike against the great deceiver. It was an act of supreme religious warfare, a living, breathing exorcism. Let us leave the grand sweep of theology and empire and walk into a single home. Let us imagine a life. The year is 450 AD. The place Ctesiphon, the sprawling, magnificent capital of the Sasanian Empire. Here lives a young nobleman named Ardashir. He is 17. His world is one of silk, of poetry, of horsemanship, and of profound, unshakable faith. From his earliest memory, Ardashir has known his destiny. It was taught to him by his father, a stern but respected satrap. It was sung to him in the hymns of the Magi, the white-robed priests who tended the eternal sacred fires in the temples. It was reflected in the honored eyes of his own community, who looked upon his family with reverence. His parents, after all, were not just husband and wife. They were brother and sister. Their union was a testament to their piety, a shining example for all. And Ardashir's destiny was to follow in their footsteps. His partner in this sacred duty was to be his own sister, Roshanak. She is 15. To Ardashir, Roshanak is the light of his world. He feels a fierce, protective love for her, a bond forged in a shared childhood of garden games and whispered secrets under Mesopotamian moons. It is a pure, fraternal love. But he has been taught relentlessly that this love is merely the foundation for something far greater, far holier. He must transmute the affection of a brother into the devotion of a husband. She must see in her brother not just a playmate, but a spiritual guardian. There are moments of quiet doubt that flicker in the back of Ardashir's mind, like a candle flame in a drafty hall. When he is alone riding his horse out in the plains beyond the city walls, he feels the simple rightness of the wind and the sun. Nature feels clean, straightforward. But the doctrines of the priests are complex, heavy with cosmic significance. Is this feeling of unease his own weakness? Is it a temptation sent by Angra Mainyu to make him shirk the greatest of all commandments? He pushes the doubt away. To question the wisdom of the Magi, the wisdom of his ancestors, is to question Ahura Mazda himself. It is a thought too terrifying to entertain. He is a good son, a faithful Zoroastrian. He will do his duty. The day of their union arrives. It is not a day of romantic celebration, as we might imagine it, but one of solemn cosmic importance. The ceremony takes place in the family's private fire temple. The air is thick with the scent of sandalwood and frankincense. The eternal flame, the Attar, dances in its urn, a living representative of Ahura Mazda on earth. Ardashir and Roshanak stand before the chief Magus dressed in pure white silk. Their hands are bound together with a simple cord, a symbol of their inseparable union. The priest's voice drones on, chanting the ancient verses from the Avesta. He speaks not of love and companionship, but of war and purity. He tells them that their union is a fortress, their future children are soldiers of light, and their bedchamber is a battlefield where demons will be slain. Ardashir looks at Roshanak. Her face is pale, her eyes wide. Is it piety he sees there, or fear, or perhaps like him a confusing mixture of both? He gives her hand a gentle squeeze. It is the hand he held as a child when they were scared of the dark. Now they are being told their union is the light that banishes all darkness. The paradox is dizzying. They are pronounced husband and wife. The community rejoices. They are no longer merely the children of a satrap. They are icons of faith, pillars of their society. They have performed the Xwēdōdah. They have struck their great blow against the lie. Life continues. On the surface, it is a life of privilege and honor. Ardashir manages his family's estates. Roshanak oversees the complex household. They are respected, admired. They pray together before the sacred fire each morning, their voices mingling in the ancient hymns. They try to build a life, to find a new kind of normalcy in their transformed relationship. The line between brother and sister, husband and wife, blurs into a constant, confusing haze. The easy familiarity of their childhood is gone, replaced by a stilted formality, a consciousness of their holy yet unnatural state. A year later, Roshanak gives birth to a son. There is great celebration. A child of a Xwēdōdah union is a blessing, a sign of Ahura Mazda's favor. But the joy is short-lived. The child is frail. He cries incessantly, a thin, pained wail that cuts through the quiet reverence of their home. He struggles to feed. His limbs are misshapen, his body weak. The physicians can do nothing. The Magi offer a different explanation. This is the work of Angra Mainyu, the old priest tells them, his eyes burning with conviction. The demon is wounded. Your union has dealt him a mighty blow, and this is his desperate final thrashing. This child's suffering is a sign of your victory. The demon has poured all its malice into this vessel, trying to break your faith. You must hold strong, purify the child with fire and water, and pray even harder. Ardashir and Roshanak do as they are told. They perform the rituals. They pray until their throats are raw, but the child only gets weaker. He dies before the turning of the seasons. Roshanak is consumed by a grief so profound it is silent. She holds the empty cradle, her expression vacant. Ardashir watches her, and the doubt he had suppressed for so long returns now as a roaring inferno. He had performed the most sacred act. He had followed the divine law to the letter. And the result was not a spiritual superweapon, but a tiny broken body and a shattered wife. Where was the light of Ahura Mazda in this? All he could see was darkness, pain, and loss, the very things Angra Mainyu was said to champion. 2 years later, they have another child, a daughter. For a few months, there is a fragile, desperate hope. But then the child begins to have seizures, her small body racked by violent, uncontrollable spasms. Once again, the Magi explain it away. The forces of chaos are in retreat. Her body is the battlefield where the Daivas are being slain. But Ardashir no longer hears piety in the priest's words. He hears only excuses. He hears the desperate justifications of a system that cannot admit it is wrong. He looks at his daughter, her face contorted in a silent scream. He looks at Roshanak, her youth withered by sorrow, her eyes once so bright now perpetually haunted. She is his sister. He was meant to protect her. And his sacred duty has destroyed her. One night, he stands before the sacred fire in his home. The flame flickers, casting dancing shadows on the walls. It is meant to be the symbol of truth, of order, of divine goodness. But now he sees something else in the flames. He sees the fever of his dying daughter. He sees the burning pyre of his firstborn son. He sees the ashes of his family's happiness. The entire cosmic structure of his faith, a structure that had seemed as solid and eternal as the mountains, now feels like a fragile illusion, a grand and terrible lie. The teachings of the Magi gave him a reason for his suffering. But his heart, his eyes, his love for his sister, they gave him the truth. Now I ask you to stop and place yourself in that silent, fire-lit room. Imagine you are Ardashir. Everything you have ever been taught, every pillar of your society, every hope for your immortal soul, rests on this single sacred act. Your family's honor, your place in the community, your standing before God, it all depends on your belief. But the evidence of your own life, the tangible, heartbreaking suffering of the people you love most, screams that the doctrine is a catastrophic failure. Do you trust the 1,000-year-old dogma and believe that this agony is a sign of your success? Do you cling to the faith that gives your tragedy a holy purpose? Or do you trust the devastating truth written on the face of your suffering child and in the empty eyes of the sister you were sworn to protect? What do you do when your holiest duty creates the deepest hell? Comment below what path you would have chosen. Ardashir's tragedy, the suffering of his children, and the sorrow of his wife was not the work of a cosmic demon named Angra Mainyu. He and his culture lacked the tools to see the truth, so they crafted a theological explanation for a biological reality. The ghost that haunted his family was not a daiva from the realm of darkness. It was a ghost in their very blood. The predictable, silent, and devastating ghost of genetics. To understand what happened to Ardashir's children, we need to understand how life itself writes its own code. Every one of us is a biological library, and our books are chromosomes. We get 23 from our mother and 23 from our father. These books contain the genes, the individual recipes for building a human being, recipes for eye color, height, and the countless proteins that make our bodies function. For most genes, we have 2 copies, or alleles, one from each parent. Some alleles are dominant, meaning you only need 1 copy for the trait to show up. Others are recessive. A recessive allele is like a secret instruction. It's in the book, but it's ignored as long as a dominant allele is present. It only gets expressed if you inherit 2 copies of it, one from each parent. Now, evolution is not a perfect process. Over millennia, random mutations occur. Most are harmless, but some create faulty recipes, harmful recessive alleles. These are the genetic equivalent of a time bomb. A single person can carry several of these faulty recessive alleles completely unaware. They are healthy because their other dominant copy of the gene works just fine masking the problem. The faulty recipe is silent. In the general population, the gene pool is vast and diverse. The chances of you with your specific set of rare, faulty, recessive alleles meeting and having a child with someone who happens to carry the exact same faulty alleles is incredibly small. The genetic lottery is in your favor. But what happens in a Xwēdōdah union? What happens when a brother and sister who share approximately 50% of their DNA have a child? They inherited their genes from the same two parents. If their father, for instance, carried a rare, harmful, recessive allele, there's a 50% chance he passed it to Ardashir and a 50% chance he passed it to Roshanak. If both inherited it, they are healthy carriers. But now, when they have a child, there is a 1 in 4 chance that the child will inherit both of their faulty copies. Suddenly, there is no dominant healthy gene to mask the problem. The silent time bomb goes off. The faulty recipe is the only one the child's body has to read. The result is a genetic disorder. This isn't theoretical. It's a statistical certainty. The children of first-degree relatives have a dramatically increased risk, somewhere between 40 to 60%, of having a significant birth defect or a severe early-onset genetic disease. The frail, sickly son in our story, he could have had cystic fibrosis, a recessive disorder causing severe damage to the lungs and digestive system. Or perhaps Tay-Sachs, which destroys nerve cells in the brain and spinal cord, leading to death in early childhood. The daughter suffering from seizures, a manifestation of a severe inherited epilepsy syndrome, or a metabolic disorder that prevents the body from processing nutrients, correctly leading to neurological damage. This phenomenon is known as inbreeding depression. It's not just about single gene disorders. It's a cumulative burden. With less genetic diversity, the immune system is weaker and less able to adapt to new pathogens. Fertility rates drop. Infant mortality skyrockets. This is what Ardashir saw not as a flaw in the system, but as a feature the demons' last attack. In reality, it was the system itself, the practice of ZhouDynasty, producing its inevitable tragic outcome. But the science doesn't stop at genetics. There's a psychological component as well. Why is the incest taboo so nearly universal across human cultures? The theory of the Westermark effect provides a powerful clue. It suggests that humans who are raised in close domestic proximity during the first few years of their lives develop a natural, instinctual, sexual aversion to one another. It's a subconscious, evolutionary mechanism, a piece of psychological software designed to prevent inbreeding. It's nature's way of steering us away from the genetic catastrophe we just described. Ardashir's internal conflict, his quiet unease, may well have been this ancient instinct warring against his religious programming. Furthermore, the psychological toll of such unions is immense, even if they are culturally sanctioned. It creates a profound confusion of roles. Is this person my sister or my wife? Is this man my father or my husband? The fundamental structures of family, which provide clear roles for support, authority, and affection, are thrown into chaos. This can lead to complex trauma attachment disorders and a deep-seated sense of transgression, even when the conscious mind has been taught to believe the act is holy. Roshanak's silent, all-consuming grief was not just for her children, but perhaps for the loss of a fundamental part of her own identity, the simple, uncomplicated role of being a sister. The story of ZhouDynasty and the Sasanian Persians feels alien, a relic from a world with a different moral compass. It's tempting to isolate them, to view them as a historical anomaly. But to do so would be a mistake. It would be to miss the larger, more unsettling truth. The Persians were not unique in their practice of incest, only in their justification. Looking across the span of history, we see the same taboo being broken again and again, each time for a different but equally powerful ideal. Let us journey west from Persia and further back in time to the golden sands of Egypt. Here, for millennia, the pharaoh was not just a king. He was a living god, the incarnation of Horus. His blood was not human, but divine. And like the holy lineage of the Zoroastrians, this divine essence could not be diluted. The brother-sister marriages of pharaohs like Tutankhamun, who married his half-sister Ankhesenamun, were not about fighting a cosmic demon. They were about maintaining a divine state. It was a matter of celestial biology. To marry a commoner was to pollute the blood of the gods. Incest was a tool of theocracy, a way to keep the line between mortal and divine stark and clear. The goal wasn't to save the world from evil, but to preserve a dynasty's claim to godhood. Generations later, after Alexander the Great conquered the known world, his general Ptolemy took control of Egypt. His Greek dynasty, in order to legitimize their rule and be accepted as true successors to the pharaohs, adopted the ancient custom. The famous Cleopatra VII was a product of generations of incestuous marriage, and she herself married two of her own brothers. Here the practice was a tool of political pragmatism. It was a calculated strategy to consolidate power, to eliminate rival claimants to the throne, and to present a seamless continuation of pharaonic tradition to the Egyptian people. The justification had shifted from the divine to the political. Now let us leap forward in time and travel north to the heart of early modern Europe and the sprawling empire of the House of Habsburg. For over 200 years, this family dominated Europe. Their goal was singular: to hold and expand their power. Their motto was, "Let others wage war, thou happy Austria marry." Their strategy was to weave a web of dynastic marriages that would place a Habsburg on every throne. To keep their vast territories and wealth within the family, they turned inward. The marriages were not typically brother-sister, but the next closest thing, a relentless series of unions between uncles and nieces and first cousins. The Habsburgs were devout Catholics. Their justification was neither Zoroastrian cosmology nor pharaonic divinity. It was purely about dynastic security and terrestrial power. Yet the biological result was identical. The infamous Habsburg jaw, a severe mandibular prognathism, became the physical signature of their lineage. But the visible deformity was the least of it. The final Habsburg king of Spain, Charles II, was a tragic genetic endpoint. His family tree was so convoluted, he had a higher coefficient of inbreeding than a child of a brother-sister union. He was physically disabled, mentally infirm, and impotent. His death without an heir plunged Europe into the War of the Spanish Succession. The very strategy designed to preserve their power ultimately led to its collapse. So we have three great civilizations, three different eras, three different justifications. The Persians did it for God. The Egyptians did it for divinity. The Habsburgs did it for power, religion, divine right, and politics. Three of the most powerful motivating forces in human history. Each one in its own way was used to sanctify an act that nature itself seems to forbid. What does this mirror of history show us? It reveals a terrifying human capacity for ideological blindness. It shows that when a belief system, be it religious, political, or social, becomes sufficiently powerful, it can grant permission to ignore observable reality. The Magi saw sick children and interpreted it as spiritual victory. The Habsburgs saw the growing deformities in their own family and saw it as the cost of maintaining an empire. The core question is not, how could they do that? The question is, what powerful idea allows us to do things that are ultimately self-destructive? The story of Xwēdōdah is not just about the Persians. It is a cautionary tale about the power of an idea to overwrite instinct, to redefine morality, and to turn a clear-eyed view of suffering into a symbol of success. It's about our ability to build logical, internally consistent cages of belief that trap us even while we call them sacred. The practice of Xwēdōdah, once the pinnacle of piety in a mighty empire, has vanished. It exists now only as a whisper in obscure historical texts, a footnote that modern Zoroastrians have rightly and firmly rejected. So how did a sacred duty practiced for centuries simply fade away? Its end was as complex as its beginning. The death knell for Xwēdōdah was not a scientific revelation or a moral epiphany from within. It was conquest. In the 7th century AD, the armies of Islam swept out of the Arabian Peninsula, and the mighty Sasanian Empire, weakened by plague and endless wars with Byzantium, collapsed. Under new rule, the Zoroastrians went from being the privileged majority to a pressured minority. The surrounding Islamic culture, and indeed the Christian cultures they also interacted with, viewed next-of-kin marriage with abhorrence. It was seen as a barbaric and sinful perversion. To survive, the Zoroastrian community had to adapt. The practice became a source of shame and stigma, a liability in their interactions with their new rulers and neighbors. Gradually, over generations, the interpretations of the Magi began to change. The texts that once praised Xwēdōdah were reinterpreted, explained away as allegorical, or quietly set aside. The community's instinct for survival was stronger than its adherence to even its most extreme doctrines. The Parsis, who fled to India to preserve their faith, and the Zoroastrians who remained in Iran, both evolved. They abandoned the practice, completely proving that even the most deeply entrenched religious ideas are not immutable. They can and do change in the face of new social and political realities. So the story is over. A strange historical curiosity put to bed centuries ago. Or is it? The biological mechanism of Xwēdōdah may be gone, but the psychological mechanism that drove it is alive and well, perhaps more powerful today than ever before. The core idea behind Xwēdōdah was the pursuit of purity. It was about creating a closed system, a pure in-group, the holy bloodline, to protect against the defilement of a corrupting out-group, the followers of Angra Mainyu. It was about ideological inbreeding. It was about sealing oneself off from anything that could dilute or challenge the central truth. Does that sound familiar? We no longer fear that our blood will be diluted, but we are terrified that our ideas will be. We have traded the fear of a cosmic demon for the fear of the political opponent, the cultural other, the dissenting opinion. We have recreated the fortress of the Xwēdōdah family in the digital realm. Consider the modern echo chamber. Social media algorithms designed to keep us engaged, learn what we believe, and feed us a constant, comforting diet of confirmation. They carefully filter out challenging viewpoints, just as the Magi filtered out any interpretation of suffering that didn't fit their dogma. We surround ourselves with voices that echo our own, creating a pure, closed loop of information. In this bubble, our own beliefs are concentrated, intensified, folded back on themselves, until they become more and more extreme, more potent. We become spiritually, or rather ideologically, inbred. The other side is no longer seen as a group of fellow citizens with different opinions. They are demonized. They become our Angra Mainyu. Their ideas are not just wrong. They are portrayed as corrupting, dangerous, and evil, a drooge that threatens to poison our perfect worldview. We are told that engaging with them is a form of contamination, a dilution of our own righteous purity. This ideological inbreeding has the same result as its genetic counterpart. It produces deformities. Not physical ones like the Habsburg jaw, but intellectual and social ones. It leads to radicalism, an inability to compromise, a loss of critical thinking, and a society that, like Charles II of Spain, becomes dysfunctional and infertile unable to produce the healthy new ideas and solutions needed to survive. We see the suffering this causes, the political polarization, the social strife, the breakdown of civil discourse, and like the Magi, we interpret it as a sign that we must fight even harder, that we must become even more pure in our ideology. We see the pain as proof that the demon of the other side is lashing out, and that the only solution is to retreat deeper into the fortress of our own beliefs. The story of Xwēdōdah serves as a terrifying metaphor for the modern age. It teaches us that the desire for purity, while sounding noble, is often a mask for fear. A fear of complexity, a fear of contamination, a fear of being wrong. The ancient Persians created a closed system to fight a demon, and in doing so they created real, tangible monsters in the form of genetic disease. We are creating our own closed systems to fight our modern demons, and we too are creating monsters, division, hatred, and an inability to see the humanity in those who disagree with us. The fundamental pattern is identical, the elevation of an idea to a point where it justifies creating a closed, pure system, even when the evidence of the harm it causes is all around us. We have journeyed far. We began with a shocking taboo and found a complex system of spiritual warfare. We entered the home of a fictional nobleman and felt the weight of his tragic duty. We peered through the cold, clear lens of science and saw the inevitable biological outcome. We held up the mirror of history and saw the same pattern reflected in the courts of pharaohs and kings. And finally, we have turned that mirror upon ourselves and seen a disquieting echo in our own modern world. The story of Xwēdōdah is not a simple one of condemnation. It would be easy to label the ancient Persians as monstrous or foolish, to thank our lucky stars for progress and science, and to close this chapter of history with a sense of comfortable superiority. But that would be the greatest disservice to the lessons this story holds. The people who practiced Xwēdōdah were not evil. They were human. They were driven by a desire for meaning, a need to believe they were part of something greater than themselves, a desperate yearning to bring order to a chaotic world. They were fighting what they believed to be the ultimate battle of good versus evil. Their tragedy was that the weapon they chose, the one they were told was their greatest strength, was actually a poison. Their devotion was sincere, but their foundational premise was catastrophically flawed. This is the timeless, terrifying power of ideology. It can take our best impulses, our desire for purity, for truth, for a better world, and warp them into tools of our own destruction. It can convince us that suffering is victory, that isolation is strength, and that doubt is a sin. The cosmic battle between Ahura Mazda and Angra Mainyu, between order and chaos, truth and the lie, did not end with the fall of the Sasanian Empire. It is a battle that is never over. We fight it every single day, not in the cosmos, but on the terrain of our own minds. We fight it in our communities, in our politics, and in our personal relationships. We are all constantly choosing between opening ourselves up to the complex, messy, and often contradictory nature of reality or retreating into the pure, simple, and ultimately sterile fortress of our certainties. And so we are left with a final lingering question. It is the most important one. The Persians sacrificed their children on the altar of a holy war against a demon. We look back with a mixture of horror and pity. But what about us? Which of our own modern certainties, our most deeply held beliefs, our most sacred political or social dogmas, are we defending so fiercely that we cannot see the harm they cause? What are the sick children in our own society that we are explaining away as a necessary cost of our righteous battle? What demons are we fighting? And what if, after all this time, we look in the mirror and discover that the demon we are fighting is simply a reflection of ourselves? The history of ZhouDynasty is dark, not because its practitioners were evil, but because they were so tragically, so sincerely, and so devastatingly wrong. The question we must ask ourselves is, how can we be sure that we are not? What modern belief do you think future generations will look back on with confusion and horror? Share your thoughts in the comments. Subscribe to The Hidden Past for more journeys into the shadows of the past.